Today, how to paint plastic bump strips on a car. Now, as it happens for me, I'm very lucky. The door rubbing strips on this Saab are clipped on and are removable. So I'm going to paint them in the garage. But on most cars, the rubbing strips are adhered on with two-sided 3M tape. If you're particularly keen, you could take them off. Better off masking it and painting them on the car. It also helps me to make the video a little bit shorter. I'm sure I don't need to insult your intelligence by showing you how to mask up a piece of trim work. But before you do anything else, clean the panel and clean the bump strips down. A good wash with a stiff brush or a sponge and some soap and plenty of water, and then allow them to dry thoroughly. In my case, I took the bump strips off and I took these inside and I gave them a good scrubbing in the bathroom. Exactly what you do next depends a little bit on how old your bump strips are and what material they're made from. Now, most bump strips are made of the same material as bumpers. In this case, that's a polyprop PP with about 30% EPDM, which gives them plenty of flexibility. That makes these a soft plastic. If you can find out what your bump strips are made of, you might find they're made of a PCABS, which is quite a hard plastic, particularly if they're stuck on. Now, if like these, they started off black and they've faded to grey, like your Visage, then the reason they faded to grey is because the colour pigment in the surface has evaporated away along with some of the plasticizers. If you watched my previous video about preparing plastics for painting, you'll have seen me waft a flame over the plastics to prepare the surface. Also, wafting the flame over the surface also brings plasticizers from deeper in the plastic back up to the surface and actually helps to restore the black colour. And I don't want to do that this time. So since the plasticizers and colour have evaporated away, I'm going to leave them as they are, but I am going to give them a thorough degrease and clean down with some cellulose thinners. Use a freshly laundered, preferably brand new, microfiber cloth, some fresh cellulose thinners, and make sure that you get the whole of the surface that is going to be painted, and particularly around the edges, and give them a good rub down. Again, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by showing you me rubbing down all four of these. Once you've treated them with Spirit Wipe, lay them down on your work surface. Make sure that you do not touch the surface that you're going to paint. You don't want to put grease off your fingers onto that surface. Also, what I've done on this surface, I've used some washers underneath the items so that they just stand off the surface ever so slightly. You don't want the paint that you put along that edge to stick to your work surface. The first paint that's got to go on is plastic primer, either grey or clear, sometimes known as adhesion aid. Warm the can by leaving it in a warm place for 24 hours inside the house, or maybe stand it in a bowl of warm water for 10 minutes and then shake it thoroughly. Then before you spray the items themselves, do a test spray on the side of a cardboard box or some other surface to make sure that fresh paint is flowing through the nozzle properly. That also has a second purpose of allowing you to get used to and see the width of the spray pattern. A first light coat. Just a light coat for the first coat. Now leave this for 10 minutes. Keep your can of paint warm, keep it shut, and put a second medium coat on. Now you'll want to leave this for 20 minutes because we're going to be changing paint. Exactly what happens next depends a little bit on the original parts and their finish, and also what finish you're after. These have a very, very light grain on the surface, which the standard primer is not going to hide. And I want a smooth finish like you get on bodywork itself. So to achieve that, I'm going to have to put some high build primer on this next, which is why we're leaving it for 20 minutes. As with the plastic primer, warm your can and then give it a really good shake. If you're using high build primer like I am, this contains a much higher percentage of solids in the paint than does normal primer, and so it will need more shaking. So pay attention to any instructions on the can about that. Go a little bit overboard on the shaking. Again, as before, start your spray off and a light coat. As luck would have it, this particular high build primer is a different colour to the plastic primer, so it's easier to see where you're going with it. And again, leave it for 10 minutes, followed by a medium to wet coat. And leave for 30 minutes. With this medium to wet coat on, you should be able to go for colour next. If you can still see a little bit of the grain after 20 minutes when it's dried a bit, then maybe put another medium to wet coat on, but I'm going to go straight for colour. Also, top tip, if when you're painting, particularly with the high build primer, and you have to hold the can at a slight angle like I do, the instant that the spray even hints at starting to splutter a little, get a fresh can on the job. You can always use what's left in that for another job another day. Inspect your handiwork at this point. Check that you've got no big nibs of dust or dirt that have landed in your paint. I've found one or two very small ones, and if you do want to get them out, use one of these fiberglass abrasive brushes. I'll link to them in the description. But I'm not going to bother, because it's even with these, it's too easy to end up going right through the paint back to the bare plastic. And also make sure that you've got enough high build primer on now that the surface is smooth. Warm your colour, shake it up thoroughly, start the spray off, and make sure you know which way the fan is oriented in the spray head if it's got a fan, because you want to move the can perpendicular to the fan direction. So then start off at the edges this time. And a light coat of colour. Don't worry that you can see the primer through it still. The first coat only needs to be very light. And a second light coat after 10 minutes. Followed by a third and hopefully final wet coat after another 10 minutes. And leave that now for about 40 to 45 minutes. And finally, apply 3 coats of lacquer using the exact same process. 2 light coats followed by a wet coat, all at 10-minute intervals. Use a 2K clear coat. This one is HB Body Pro C496. It comes out and paints like a 1K. And when it interacts with the air, it becomes a 2K and hardens off. The very best 2K lacquer that I think is on the market is called Spraymax, but I wasn't able to get any. This comes a very close second, and I did the bumper trims with this, and they've survived perfectly well for about 4 years now. And once the final wet coat has gone on, leave them exactly where they are, 2 hours at least, or overnight if it's not too warm like it isn't at the minute here. Now, if the trims that you've painted are not too large and you can get them in your oven, after the 2 hour flashing off period, bake them in the oven at 80 centigrade for about an hour. Or if you've got one of those halogen heaters, stand them up in front of the heater, put the heater on, oscillate, warm them up with the heater. That's pretty much how they do it in a body shop. But otherwise, leave them alone and let the paint harden. I'm very pleased with the surface finish on them, and one of the ways you get a very, very good smooth finish is by making sure that the final coat is wet. There's also just the odd tiny nib of dirt. There's one there, but of course, when the car's on the road, under the control of my right foot, no one's going to see that. And here they are fitted back on the car. If you got value from this video, please consider supporting the channel in some way, and I shall see you on the next one.